where I think we're going to see price erosion first, it's going to be in the Canon 60 Mark II. What's up, everybody? Daniel with bokehmarket.com, bokehmarket.com if you want to pronounce it that way. We're going to talk about the A7 III today, and namely how it's going to impact other pricing across the board. Before we get started, I want to remind everybody, like everybody else on YouTube does, if you like this video, give it a like. If you love it, we would love a subscribe. We're trying to build our subscriber base because we've changed the channel a little bit from a general consumer electronics channel to be more photography focused. And that's because this is supporting the website that I mentioned, bokehmarket.com. It's a website that I created that exists to really democratize pricing information across the board for photography gear. So we're a price guide for used and new photography gear, cameras, lenses, moving into adapters, cinema cameras, and other things in the future. We're also a real-time marketplace. We've got pricing alerts for anything new that hits the market. You can set up a profile and create your own alerts, and we'll let you know when the product you're looking for hits the market. So because of that, because we're so, best bang for your buck, value focused, we're not going to necessarily be a review channel, that will do some of that. We're going to be more focused on how these products or new products or existing products either represent great value or will impact the industry. And so that leads us to the A7 III. And before we talk about how the A7 III is going to impact value for photography gear across the industry, I want to talk a little bit about the brands, Canon and Nikon mainly, that have had a very loyal following and the things about Sony that have kept them from jumping ship. So Canon and Nikon obviously are mainly used by, or have a huge professional base and a huge prosumer base as well. They both have great glass, but both of them represent the best and, in my opinion, the worst of what's going on right now with the photography industry. Sony, on the other hand, has been a huge upstart in the full-frame mirrorless space, but every step along the way, while they've had big improvements, leaps and bounds improvements with each generation of their specialized cameras, the A7S, the A7R, and obviously the new introduction with the A9, and their general hero that we're talking about today, the A7. Each version of that has improved greatly over its predecessor, but they've always left us a little bit lacking or packed the best features into a specialized version of their camera, be it low light video performance in the A7S or high megapixels in the A7R or super autofocus in the newly introduced A9. So when you have a platform like the A7, not the A7S or A7R, the A7 that's sort of got to be that all-arounder, that comparison to the D750, great wedding photography shooter, but also supports you in video. There's some things you need that are in these other bodies that have lacked, that Sony has lacked putting in there up until this point. So that's kept Canon and Nikon users in their respective camps, because there's got to be an incentive to jump from an ecosystem where you have a lot of glass or you're really invested, and if you're a wedding photographer, it needs to be reliable, it needs to have all those things that you've had in these other bodies on these other platforms for the longest, and one of those things is battery life. Sony hasn't been great with battery life. They introduced the Z battery in the A9, and we didn't think it was coming in the A7 III, but it did. Low light performance. Well, A7 III's got great low light performance. We've seen it in a ton of videos that have shown great high ISO performance, outperforming the A7S too. So that's something that's going to interest other brand evangelists to come over. And then really where I think Sony has improved the most and has created the biggest move into competing, encroaching in these other areas is autofocus. So A7 II autofocus was better than the A7, but still not great, especially if you had to use adapted lenses. And so the A9 came along and it had the great autofocus, but it's a super expensive body, so it didn't really resonate with a lot of people. It was a specialist camera. With them putting that A9 focus system in this camera body, I really think you're going to start seeing Canon and Nikon users look their way. And what Sony has been doing consistently, that they're really doing with the A7 III, that's going to cause them to sort of create some separation in the competition is video. So yes, video is not important to a lot of people. 4K video isn't important to a lot of people, but more and more we're seeing the expectation from stills photography users that want to shoot a little video that these cameras utilize these great sensors and these powerful bodies to provide a really good video experience. And that's where I think Canon and Nikon are really missing out right now. Canon has got some protectionism going on there where they're showing, they're protecting their higher end bodies and not introducing things like 4K video on the 6D Mark II or crippling the M50, which was a really embarrassing release in my opinion for the Canon, with the crop factor or losing dual pixel autofocus. So if we're gonna look at where I think we're going to see price erosion first, it's going to be in the Canon 6D Mark II, because that body was released last year and it was really a disappointment. So the dynamic range issues that we've all known, but really the bigger issue to me is video. And the 6D Mark II, with having an opportunity to release a 2,000 price point full frame video camera with 4K video and good autofocus, they completely missed the opportunity. And this gave Sony a chance to have a foothold in that space, and Canon consistently is missing out on the opportunity to be a leader in video. So not only lacking 4K, but their 1080p is shown to be really soft. Either pixel binning or codecs or whatever, they're still protecting those cameras and seeing video as an afterthought. Nikon, on the other hand, has a great wedding workhorse in the D750 that's super affordable, but is showing its age. It's about 4 years old. They've got some cameras in the D500, the 7500, the 850 that are great at what they do as stills cameras, and also have introduced a pretty clean, nice 4K image in their video. Some have a significant crop factor, but the bigger issue with Nikon, and what's really frustrated me with them, is their terrible live view autofocus. And this is important because if you consider the fact that most of the people that are stills photographers first and hybrid, getting into that hybrid space where they shoot a little video, they're not experienced manual focus pullers. So they need that autofocus to work really well for them. And they don't necessarily have it in a Nikon body, so it has them looking elsewhere. I've had a D500 that I loved, that I really wanted to be a great all-around camera, especially for the autofocus performance, but I just couldn't get there because of the video. And we're getting away from having a separate camera for video and a camera for stills for a number of reasons, not just convenience, but cost and all of that. So these are two companies that I think are really going to feel the heat because they're going to see an exodus from their platforms. And now's where we get into the discussion how this affects pricing. Let's look at the competition for the Sony A7 III in that $2,000 price space. So first you got the Canon 6D Mark II, which we've already talked about. If I'm a Canon user, I'm invested in Canon glass, and I see that I can either buy a 6D Mark II that's got all of the issues that's plagued it, even though it's still a great stills camera. Let's be honest. The original 6D is still a great stills camera, and I own one, and it's great. But if I'm looking at the 6D Mark II at $1,800 compared to the brand new Sony A7 III at $2,000, I'm not buying the 6D Mark II. Even if I've got Canon glass, I can adapt for a couple $100. I can adapt, and look, y'all, if you haven't tried a Sony body with adapted Canon glass lately, it's so much better than it was before. It's even from the A7 II to this A7R II, it got a lot better. So I think in that space, you're looking at an opportunity for people that are already invested in an ecosystem to not take a huge hit because they can carry their glass along with them. The M50 to me is dead on arrival for what it is. It is a good cost if you're cost conscious and you're doing vlogging. It might be a good option, but there's stuff like, if you're just a vlogger, look at the Panasonic G7 for $400 used, or the GX85 that's got in-body image stabilization, 4K image, clean. Again, still able to use Canon glass with a speed booster. So I don't think that camera is going to be a good value proposition, in spite of all the YouTubers making videos about it conveniently in the same week a couple of months ago. And if you notice, none of them stayed with the 60 Mark II because the 1080p is not a clean signal. Maybe there's other reasons. So from that standpoint, I think if you're looking at the 60 Mark II and the A7III, you're going to pick the A7III. If you already have a 60 Mark II, you might hang on to it, but a lot of people are going to sell them because this is a great opportunity to jump in that space. So what I think is going to happen is what we've seen happen with the Sony bodies, especially we posted an article about what happened to the A7R II when the A7R III was announced. That was a workhorse, highly coveted camera in the high megapixel space that went from $1,950 average secondary market price to, I saw one yesterday for $1,499 with multiple batteries, super clean, low shutter count. So we're going to see this happen across the board. So with Canon owners, I think what's Canon going to do at this point? They still want to sell the 60 Mark II, so they're going to have to compete with Sony on price, which means they're going to have to lower the price down to $1,500 or so, maybe even lower, to give someone an incentive to not go with the A7III. A couple $100 is not enough incentive. So if a camera now that's $1,500 used becomes $1,500 new, then we're going to see significant price erosion in that Canon 60 Mark II space. That's I think it's going to be pretty bad. So if you have one of those, I'd probably get rid of it now before Canon alters the new price. That's really going to affect you as well if you try to sell it in the secondary market. Nikon D750 is a camera that is really loved, and it's an awesome camera, especially for wedding photographers and portrait photography. But in that space, you've got a 4-ish-year-old camera. Nikon's going to have to do something here soon. I think the D750 is poised for an update. I think it's going to have that 4K image that we've seen in video image that we've seen in these other new Nikon bodies, but I still think they're going to have struggles with the dual pixel they're still going to have struggles with the live view autofocus. So Canon and Nikon are exploring mirrorless options. I think this announcement will ramp that up, but I'm not necessarily sure it is going to happen in time to help the purge to Sony. But even if it does, even if this forces their hand to release a $2,000 body from Nikon or Canon that uses legacy glass, what's that going to do to their DSLRs that are at that same price point that aren't going to be as feature packed? Again, they're going to have to lower the prices, and it's just going to put overall downward pressure on the market. Fuji just announced an X-H1 that's an awesome camera. I've seen reviews from a number of people on the video side. We already knew the X-T2 was a great stills camera. This X-H1 is going to be a great stills camera. Got some other video options. It doesn't compete with like a GH5 in terms of bit rate and 10-bit and some of the abilities there, but it was announced before the A7III, and it looked like a pretty good option, and it looked like something that might send a lot of people Fuji's way. But at $1,900, I'm not sure it is, unless you're already in the Fuji ecosystem and you shoot video. But that's a pretty specific use case. If I'm looking at Fuji right now and I'm looking at Sony, again, I'm probably going to lean the Sony way because, like it or not, full frame is hot and people want it, and that APS-C sensor is not going to... It's a great sensor, but it's not new over the X-T2, so there's nothing there in terms of huge feature jump. So I think we're going to see that price drop pretty quickly. Panasonic GH5, it's still competitive. There's been some comparison videos there where it has some benefits over the A7III, but it also has some deficiencies, especially in low light. But that's a very specific camera. The GH5, the GH5S are for videographers. Sony is 95% of the way there in video features, and it takes a lap around the GH5 in terms of stills photography. So I don't know if it's going to impede that much on the GH5, but probably will the Panasonic G9. Olympus is not looking to release anything anytime soon over the latest offerings they've had that are a couple of years old. So from that standpoint, if you look at it, Sony is willing to undercut themselves, because make no mistake, A7R2 prices are going to drop, A9 and A7R3 prices are going to drop considerably over the next 6 months. And those, you know, they're willing to upset those people a little bit and cannibalize their own sales of these expensive bodies to gain market share. And I think it's a genius move on Sony's part, but I think it's going to have a ripple effect across the industry. So for all of you that maybe disagree with me, I'd love to hear what you think about it in the comments. Look, if you disagree with me, I want your comments moved to the top, because I want to have a discussion there. So just back your points up with some data and some good observation, instead of accusing me of being a Sony lover. I'm not even filming this right now on a Sony, and I don't even own a Sony camera anymore. That's a different discussion for a different day, because ergonomics and menus are still an issue for me. Probably enough to keep me away from Sony right now. Again, different issue for a different day. But I'd love to have a chat with y'all in the comments about what you think about how impactful this Sony release will be in terms of price erosion in the secondary market, and even in the new space, what it's going to do to force new prices to drop across the board. And let me know what you think Canon and Nikon will do to react to this. So that's pretty much it. I kind of did it in a one take, which is surprising. So let's talk about it in the comments. Again, if you like the video, give us a like. If you love it, give us a subscribe, and don't forget to check out bokehmarket.com. The link's in the description. Thanks so much, y'all. Have a great week.